The first thing the viewer hears is a moment suspended between pride and heartbreak. The crowd's murmur, the sound of water echoing through the stadium, and my sister's stunned silence as she realizes the boy she said wouldn't fit in is standing in the center of the platform, calm and confident, while a trainer praises him in front of everyone. I remember the way the wind moved across the water, the way Marcus tried to hide his smile because he didn't like attention, and the way my sister's expression shifted from confusion to guilt as she finally understood what she'd done. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I simply looked at her and said softly, "He doesn't have to fit into your world. He was never meant to. But this moment didn't begin here. And it certainly didn't happen because of money or spite. It began weeks earlier, in a small apartment before sunrise, when my 12-year-old son quietly tied his worn-out shoelaces for his morning paper route, the same way he had every day for nearly a year. He thought he was just working toward a new bicycle, one coin at a time, never complaining, never comparing himself to his cousins who always seemed to have more. He didn't know about the text message sitting in my phone, the one that would make me question my place in my own family, or the silence that followed when no one stood up for him. In that moment, before he walked out into the cold morning air, I saw something in him, a mix of innocence, discipline, and quiet dignity. And I realized that the world might underestimate him, but he had already learned something far greater than privilege could ever teach. That's where this story truly begins. The morning the message arrived, the world was still quiet. The street lights were fading, and the sky carried that soft gray tone that exists just before sunrise. Marcus was by the door, tying his shoes the way he always did, carefully, patiently, as if even that small task deserved his full effort. His delivery bag was already packed. He checked it twice, without being asked. I watched him for a moment longer than usual, because I already knew something he didn't. My phone buzzed again in my hand, the screen glowing in the dim light of our apartment. My sister's words sat there, sharp and cold. "It's better if Marcus doesn't come. The kids planned this for months. He won't fit in." The family group chat went silent afterward, like everyone had quietly agreed with her. No one defended him. No one questioned it. Marcus turned to me with that calm little smile he always wore. "I'll be back by 9, Mom." He didn't know the world had just drawn a line between him and everyone else. He didn't know how much those words hurt. I whispered, "Be safe," and watched him disappear into the early morning light. I sat alone after he left, the apartment suddenly feeling much larger and emptier than it ever had before. The silence didn't comfort me. It pressed against my chest. I opened the message again, reading it slowly, as if I might somehow misunderstand it the second time. But there it was, clear, deliberate, excluding my son from something that had always belonged to all of us. Family. Trip. A tradition. A tradition. A childhood memory he was being quietly erased from. What hurt most wasn't the message itself. It was the silence that followed. My mother, who always spoke up, said nothing. My brother, who usually joked to ease tension, didn't respond either. It felt like they weren't just leaving Marcus out. They were agreeing that he didn't belong. I stared at the worn edges of our kitchen table, the second-hand chairs, the faded curtains we'd patched instead of replacing. Maybe they saw our life as smaller. Maybe they assumed we were struggling. They never asked. They never understood why I chose simplicity. I wasn't ashamed of how we lived, but at that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt small in my own family. I opened my banking app, not to check whether I could afford anything, but to remind myself of the truth I had kept private. The numbers on the screen didn't match the assumptions everyone had made about me. Years earlier, after long nights of work and sacrifices nobody saw, a company had bought out my shares. I had made a decision that day to live simply, to raise Marcus with values instead of indulgence, to let him understand effort before reward. I never told my sister. She'd assumed our modest apartment meant lack, not choice. She assumed his paper route was necessity, not character. But money, when kept quiet, becomes invisible, and people mistake humility for weakness. I thought about Marcus waking before dawn, earning each dollar with soft determination. He believed hard work meant something, and I wanted that belief to stay pure. But now, my sister had used our simplicity as a reason to exclude him, not because he didn't belong, but because she believed he was beneath the world she wanted her children to live in. I closed the app slowly. This wasn't about proving wealth. It was about protecting a child who already understood value more deeply than anyone realized. For a long time, I just sat there and let the emotions move through me. Anger, disappointment, sadness, and something heavier, betrayal. I didn't want to react out of pride or spite. I didn't want Marcus to become part of a competition he had never agreed to. I remembered the times he had watched his cousins unwrap expensive gifts while he clapped with genuine happiness for them. He never compared. He never asked why. He simply returned to his jar of coins and kept saving. That kind of heart is fragile, and once broken, it never comes back the same. I thought about confronting my sister immediately. But what would that teach him? That loudness wins. That we fight to be included where we aren't valued. No. I wanted him to learn something different. That dignity docenti begged for a seat at someone else's table. That self-worth isn't handed out by others. I decided then that if he was going to experience something unforgettable, it wouldn't be to prove a point to anyone. It would be to remind him and myself that kindness, patience, and humility deserved moments of wonder too. This wasn't revenge. This was a lesson in quiet strength. In the days leading up to spring break, I watched my sister's posts fill my feed. Swimsuit shopping, suitcases lined across the floor, her children laughing in rehearsed excitement while she narrated every detail of their perfect family trip. Friends commented about how lucky her kids were. She liked every reply. Marcus saw the posts too, but he didn't say anything until one evening when he hesitated in the doorway. "Mom, are they really going without us?" His voice wasn't angry. It was soft, careful, as if he didn't want to hurt me by asking. That hurt more than anything. I sat beside him and told him we had our own plans, just on a different day. His eyes brightened, but Dow still sat quietly behind them. He'd heard the silence in the group chat too. He felt the separation. He just didn't know how to name it. That night, while he slept, I packed his clothes as carefully as he packed his delivery bag every morning. Not to impress anyone. Not to display anything. But because I wanted every moment of what was coming to remind him that effort, discipline, and goodness were never things to be ashamed of. When we arrived in San Diego, Marcus pressed his face against the car window like a child seeing the world open for the first time. The city shimmered beneath the morning sun, the ocean stretching beyond the skyline. Our guide greeted us with a warm smile, speaking to Marcus with kindness instead of condescension. He listened. He asked thoughtful questions. He thanked every person who helped us. There was no entitlement in him, only wonder and gratitude. As we moved through quiet corridors and private exhibits, I noticed how the staff responded to him, not to our package, but to his curiosity, his patience, his respect. He wasn't overwhelmed by the experience. He absorbed it, and for the first time since that message arrived, I felt peace settle in my chest. This wasn't about access or privilege. This was about giving a child space to grow into the kind of person he already was. Someone who didn't need to prove his worth to belong anywhere. The moment our paths crossed with my sister's family, it didn't happen all at once. At first, she saw only the setting, the restricted platform, the trainers, the guides speaking with us by name. Then her eyes found Marcus, and everything in her expression shifted. Confusion, realization, shock, a flicker of insecurity. Her children pressed against the railing, whispering questions. Her husband grew quiet, his face tightening with discomfort. She didn't understand how we were there, not just inside the park, but standing in a place she hadn't even known existed. For the first time, she saw the gap between what she assumed and what was real. Not financial, but moral. Marcus didn't brag. He didn't even look toward them. He simply focused on the dolphins, smiling carefully, as if the moment itself was a privilege he didn't want to disturb. When she finally approached us, the words didn't come out with confidence. They trembled. I didn't know. I didn't think. She tried to frame it as misunderstanding, as logistics, as something practical and harmless. But beneath every excuse was the truth. She decided who my son was without ever asking. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shame her in front of her children. I spoke quietly, because lessons don't need volume to leave an impact. I told her she hadn't excluded him because of age or plans, but because she believed humility meant inferiority. Her defensiveness faded. Guilt rose in its place, and for once, she had nothing left to say. Later that day, while we sat in the quiet corner of our cabana, Marcus finally asked the question he had been holding inside. She didn't want me there, did she? His voice was calm, not angry, not bitter, just searching for honesty. I didn't hide from it. I told him the truth, gently. He nodded slowly, and I saw the hurt pass through him in a single silent breath. Then something remarkable happened. He straightened his shoulders, not out of pride, but out of understanding. I'm glad we came. This way. In that moment, I realized he had just been excluded. He had outgrown the place he was never meant to shrink himself to fit into. The rest of our trip unfolded softly. Not loud or showy, but meaningful. He asked deeper questions, listened to every answer, and thanked every person who shared their time with him. The staff admired his sincerity. The guide told me he was one of the most respectful young guests she had ever worked with. Each moment wasn't just an experience, it was an affirmation of who he already was. And I knew then that this trip would stay with him, not because of access or privilege, but because he had lived it with grace instead of resentment. We crossed paths with my sister again, twice. She avoided my eyes each time, her children quiet and restless, the tension between them almost visible. Her husband nodded once in acknowledgement, not out of intimidation, but out of respect. The difference wasn't where we sat or what we had access to. The difference was composure, perspective, character. Marcus never gloated. He never compared. He simply existed in the moment with quiet gratitude, and I realized that was something money could never purchase nor replace. When we returned home, my phone overflowed with messages, confusion turning into defensiveness, then softening into regret. Apologies came layered in explanations. I didn't respond right away. Some wounds aren't healed by words typed in panic. I watched Marcus prepare for his paper route the next morning, the same way he always had: calm, steady, disciplined. He didn't see himself as someone who needed to prove anything now. He simply continued being who he was, unchanged and unspoiled by validation. That night, after he went to bed, I looked at him sleeping. The same child who had been judged, underestimated, dismissed, and I felt nothing but pride. Not because of what we could afford, or what anyone finally realized, but because he stayed kind in a world that tried to measure him by the wrong things. My sister once said he wouldn't fit in. She was right. He didn't fit into entitlement, comparison, or pride. He belonged somewhere better, in a life built on character, dignity, and quiet strength. And that was worth more than anything anyone else could ever give or take away. As the sun dipped low over the parking lot, and the last echoes of laughter and splashing water faded into the evening air, I found myself walking beside Marcus in quiet reflection. He wasn't talking about the moment on the platform or the trainer's praise or the way the entire crowd had clapped for him. He was talking about how the dolphins seemed calm, how they listened, how they moved together without trying to outshine one another. That's who he'd always been. Gentle, observant, steady. I realized then that this day wasn't about proving my sister wrong or forcing anyone to feel guilty. It was about showing my son, and maybe myself, that belonging has nothing to do with acceptance from others, and everything to do with knowing your own worth. My sister walked toward us slowly, her steps hesitant, the weight of her choices finally resting on her shoulders. She tried to speak, but the words came out fragile and unfinished. Marcus looked at her, not with anger or resentment, but with the quiet strength he'd carried from the beginning. In that silence, she understood more than any argument could have taught her. People like him don't fit in. They stand out in ways the world isn't always ready to see. And as we drove home that evening, the sky painted in soft shades of gold and blue, I knew that no matter who doubted him, excluded him, or underestimated him, my son would continue to walk his own path, not seeking permission, not asking to belong, but simply becoming the kind of person others eventually learn to respect.